Hello everyone, this video is in our Great Engine Game series. I'm Grandmaster Matthew Sadler and we are going to be taking a look at the game Stockfish against Scorpio from the TCEC Swiss. This game is a lovely demonstration of, I suppose grinding from a symmetrical structure. I really didn't think that that white had very much from the opening, but Stockfish kept on causing problems and eventually Scorpio collapsed. Well, we've been watching a lot of Petroffs in the World Championship, and I think this is a very nice example of how to play with white in those sort of symmetrical structures. So we joined the game at move 8. The TCC opening moves were a bit funny, but we end up in this situation, which is actually you can reach it from the Petroff, also from the Exchange French, and even the Queen's Gambit accepted as well. So quite broad. Even the Alekin would not be impossible actually. And in this position, white has to decide what to do with the structure. If black plays d takes c4, bishop takes c4, we get an IQP position, but with a few interesting features. So, for example, knight c3, d takes c4, bishop takes c4. Normally in an IQP, the c pawn is on e6, which blocks the bishop on c4. Here, in actual fact, the bishop is attacking f7, and when the knight uses an outpost on e5, there's going to be some real pressure on the f7 pawn. Also, the fact that the e file is open makes rook e1 from white much more dangerous. There's also the slightly strange fact of this knight being on c6. Normally it comes to d7 b6. So this would not be a typical IQP for black, and it would offer a number of features that are quite promising for white. Funnily enough, I have played these lines as black, but normally with a bishop on d6, and then the knight can come round to e7, g6, or e7, f5. Here black's a tempo down on that, so this would probably be quite promising for white. What black does though is play this move knight b4, and it's aiming to gain a tempo on the bishop on d3. And then, for example, if you go bishop e2, then I can think about taking on c4 and then playing the knight to d5 and gained a couple of tempi and established the knight on d5. That can't be all bad. Stockfish took an interesting decision here, and actually most of my engines take this decision too. It's not at all intuitive for me, I have to say. But they play c5 and just allow black to get the two bishops and give up this light squared bishop. I don't like giving up the bishop pair, and obviously when you've got a centre like pawns on c5 and d4, all on dark squares, it does feel a little bit risky to give away your defender of the light squares around it. But it saves time for white and also aids white's development, and white has got a spatial advantage, so you're going to be able to make good use of the outpost on e5. You've got the open e file, you'll get there first. So there's plenty of dynamic compensation, as well as the the plan that we're going to see in the game of just advancing the queenside pawns and increasing your space advantage there. So actually, it's a very good and reasonable move, but it just I think the point about it is that it does add a little bit to the risk of white's position, because black gets the two bishops, and if you run out of dynamic steam, then you can end up suffering just because you're missing a light squared bishop, and black can start invading on the squares around your centre. But if you play well, then presumably the danger is not that great. So c6, rook e1, rook e8, and bishop g5. Very natural development from white here. What Scorpio did here was very, very reasonable. There are other ways of doing it. In my engine games, both Stockfish and Koi Visto 7.9 tried this sort of plan, knight h7, but it's going to come to about the same thing. I mean, you're going to try and relieve that pin, exchange off the dark squared bishops. That does cost black the two bishops, but yeah, there's pressure to be relieved. And then afterwards, you're just going to try and stay a bit solid, really, and kick that knight away with f6. It's very, very solid indeed. And I got an awful lot of draws between Stockfish and Koivisto from these sort of positions. But yeah, what Scorpio does is completely reasonable. Same sort of idea. Just putting the knight on h5. Yeah, maybe less solid than f8. And yeah, somehow this knight ends up, yeah. A little bit useless on the side of the board, but I don't think it's anything to do with the opening moves. I mean, I think this was a perfectly good and reasonable way of playing. Just having a knight going h7 to f8 would be even more solid. Yeah, so knight e2 played in the game. Oops. So knight e2 played in the game. Yeah, I mean, one interesting thing, this was played in a game Koivisto against Stockfish, and here you see Stockfish playing g5 and grabbing some space on the king side, which I quite liked. I have to say, this is getting the pawns like this. It always gives you these ideas of g4, and the pawns f6, g5. They prevent any sort of invasions on the dark squares. Knight can't come to e5, another knight can't come to f4. So I do like this very much. Again, it reminds me a little bit of what Jan Nepomniachtchi could have done in his game against Magnus Carlsen in Game 8, a game that he just lost at the time of recording. And yeah, again, taking space like this is quite useful on the king side. But okay, I mean, what Scorpio did is completely reasonable. b4, queen f6. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be complaining about Scorpio's moves because you're sort of, there's always the risk of criticizing based on the result. It's just at some stage, probably in a few moves' time, I just started, saying in the chat that black's pieces were getting a little bit awkward and bunched up, really, and I think it was still absolutely fine. I mean, that's not the point, but again, if you're looking for a safer way of playing, then both Stockfish and Koivisto in my games were sort of regrouping the pieces like that, and making sure that they weren't that the queen was there to defend the queen side, and that the pieces were just not loose or hanging at all. And yeah, I mean, white maintains a small edge, but it just wasn't a huge amount, really. And yeah, a lot of these games were drawn. Actually, I think all of them from this position. So yeah, maybe also interesting. What Scorpio does a little bit more risky. Queen knight. Aiming for f4, trying to get some sort of counterplay. So b5, bishop f5, queen b3, and c takes b5. So yeah, I mean, a decent idea, not giving white a pawn on c6 to aim at, but breaking up the structure. And it looks a little bit ugly, and d5 is a bit weak, it's true, but in principle, d5 you can protect with a bishop on e4, or with a knight on f6, or maybe coming into f4 later, so you should be fine. And the b7 pawn you can defend with a rook e7. So it should all be possible, but obviously there's imbalance in the position, and well, yeah, I mean, white should definitely see that as an achievement when you consider the symmetrical structure we started with. In this position, Koivisto always wanted to go knight c3, but here Stockfish was giving back this pawn, playing rook e6, and this was one typical plan here: b4, a5, queen e7, and knight c3. And white had enough counterplay to give lots of checks against the king, but black was fighting. So that again, black seems pretty active. Stockfish went knight e5, bishop e4. So we mentioned this move to defend the pawn, also attack the king. Little bit vulnerable to f3 all the time, but yeah, normally there's enough tricks. But it's one of those, you start. It's what you can see what I mean a little bit when you say the pieces are getting a little bit it's getting a little bit fraught and worrying for Black's pieces, because they're defending actively and Black's absolutely fine, but there is the potential for missing something, and then suddenly f3 proves to be decisive. And certainly as a human player, you tend to factor that in, especially as you're heading towards the time control, time getting short. You'd rather have your pieces somewhat safer than riskily active, and this is a little bit what happened to Scorpio. All of its pieces got onto squares where Stockfish could attack them, and eventually Black just got overstretched there. But for the moment, everything's fine. So Queen G5, good move. G3, Queen F5. Koivisto was quite keen on the move A6. Queen B3, Queen D2. Queen C3, Queen A2, grabbing this pawn, but actually scored very, very poorly with it. Stockfish basically got good compensation for the pawn. C6 played here, Queen A5, Queen C5, Queen B6. Quite dangerous in actual fact. It's this particular game ended in a draw. We had another game where Stockfish took the slightly longer route and just played for this long-term compensation here, and was successful. Not very much happened for the first few moves, but just played around and eventually managed to defeat Koivisto in the end. That's a little bit more risky. I think what Scorpio did was very good. In a way, this is what White wants to do, expand on the king side. On the other hand, there are plenty of weak squares, but I think it's really here that Scorpio took a couple of some risky and then a bad decision. F6 is the move that seems to be working for Black all the time. You just chase away the knight, and then you activate the knight on F4. And I think that feels absolutely perfect, doesn't it? Really, just get that knight active. And what was happening here? King F1, Knight G6, Rook D1, Knight H4. The knight comes to a very nice spot on H4, and then we play H5 and attack the king side as well. And some weak pawns, but Black's active, good squares for the knight. That just ended up in a draw between Stockfish against Koivisto. So I think, and I had a lot of games with F6, when I was analysing positions around this point, and they all ended up in draws. So that's pretty good. I think that was a very clear move to force a draw. G6, after here, Black's suddenly going to have to show a few more advanced skills in actual fact, because it's starting to get a little bit risky. Notice that G6 cuts the retreat of the bishop on E4, so F3 is really going to trap it. So King F1 played by Stockfish, Knight G7. This rather sneaky move C6, opening up the line of the queen on the rook. B takes C6 and F3, and what that means is that F6 is no longer possible now, because the rook on E7 is hanging. So this knight is completely safe, and actually Black looks in desperate trouble. This bishop is just basically more or less trapped. It's not over, and Black does have a resource, but you're going to have to be really, really clever in order to get out of this. So Queen F6, King G2, and now the move C5. What does the move C5 do? Well, it undermines this knight on E5. So obviously D takes C5 allows rook E5, and Queen takes C5 would allow rook takes C5, and then we're going to have Queen F3. So there's not really that many alternatives for White. You've got to take the bishop, and then we take this, and this knight is undermined. So the knight has to retreat, and then we go rook E4. And what have we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 3 pawns for a piece, 3 pawns for a knight. And funnily enough, in the Silicon Road to Chess Improvement, my new book, I talk a lot about engine defense. And one of the things, the techniques of defense, which engines do all the time, and I don't think it's particularly known at the human level. I've never seen anyone mention it anyway. Is heading for positions where you've got pawns for a knight, the drawing margins there seem to be extremely high, and in particular it was queen and knight versus queen and pawns, or rook and knight versus rook and pawns that the engines were aiming for. There's some great examples of that, games of Ali Stein, I think, and also a game of Stockfishes against Leela in a super final game. Somehow, especially if there's pawns on both sides of the board, there's some weaknesses in the pawn structure, then knights can find it very hard to defend everything, and at the end of the day, lots of pawns get hoovered off, and and you're going to end up with king and knight versus king, which is just a draw. So this was a good way to do it. For example, this is Stockfish as white against Koivisto, knight f3, knight g5. You see swapping off now, queen, rook and knight versus, and you see just the the difficulty the knight has to get active, swapping off loads of pawns. Really active defense from Koivisto here, and you're getting this queen and pawns against queen and knight position, and Stockfish couldn't think of anything better than just agreeing the draw here. So this c5 resource was still all right for black, but I think you can see how much more fraught the position had become, since move 18-19, and I do think that's somewhat due to this decision to put the queen on f6 and keep on gravitating the pieces towards the king side. I think that was in essence quite risky, and then just around move 27, this move g6 I think was just a poor move, letting this bishop get trapped, and after that then you're really relying on extraordinary tactics with c5 to get yourself out of trouble. So queen f6, queen h4 was played by Scorpio, and now rook c1, and the bishop is trapped, so Scorpio couldn't find anything better than to do this, and here you do have still this knight for pawns, but it's you've only got 2 pawns, and you've also got lots of other weak targets here, so this wasn't a challenge for Stockfish. Didn't even bother to take the pawn on c6, but actually went for some sort of kingside attack with knight takes h5, queen d6 takes, queen h7, and the pieces powered in and picked up the knight, and this is obviously completely lost for black, and didn't take long for Stockfish to put it away. So a very nice game in actual fact, not too spectacular really, but I thought a very nice example of how to get the maximum from this sort of symmetrical pawn structure. And as we've seen, in the World Championship, the Petroff can be a pretty tough nut to crack. Interesting just seeing how Stockfish did that, and it was all to do with essentially, placement of pieces. Just anticipating where the pieces would be well placed or riskily placed, and Stockfish did that just a little bit better than Scorpio. Okay, hope you enjoyed that video. If you liked it, why not give a like or even a subscribe to the channel? And otherwise take a look at my book, The Silicon Road to Chess Improvement, which has got masses of great engine stuff like that. But otherwise, obviously going to do lots more videos on engine chess, so hopefully see you for the next video. Thanks for watching.